Imagine a village that vanishes overnight, leaving no trace behind. No sound, no sign, not even a footprint. Yet every full moon, it reappears, as if nothing ever happened. The houses are intact, the fires are lit, but the people? They're gone, leaving only the faintest echoes of their lives. This is not just a legend. This is the story of the lost village of the spirits, and one man's journey to uncover the truth behind its haunting mystery. Long ago, in the heart of the African savanna, there was a village unlike any other. It was said to be a place blessed by the spirits, where life thrived, crops grew abundantly, and the people lived in harmony with nature. The village, known as Nguvu, had no enemies, and peace reigned for many generations. But one night, during the rise of a blood moon, everything changed. Without warning, the entire village of Nguvu vanished. The fields were left empty, the fires went cold, and the laughter of children, once heard echoing through the hills, disappeared. No one knew where the people had gone or what caused the disappearance. Only one thing was clear: the village would reappear every full moon, but without its people. With every full moon, Nguvu would reappear as if untouched by time. The houses stood firm, the animals roamed the fields, and the scent of cooking fires lingered in the air. But the people were gone. And as mysteriously as it appeared, the village would disappear once again by dawn. For years, travelers and wanderers would occasionally stumble upon the ghostly village, only to be bewildered by its eerie emptiness. The villagers from neighboring lands whispered about it, telling tales of a great curse that had befallen Nguvu. Some said the spirits had taken the villagers away, angry at their greed. Others believed the people of Nguvu had simply left, abandoning their home in search of something greater. Yet no one dared to stay the night, fearing the unknown power that controlled the village. Enter Kwesi, a young traveler from a distant village who had spent his life listening to stories of the lost village of the spirits. Unlike others, Kwesi wasn't afraid of the unknown. In fact, he was fascinated by it. A seeker of truth, Kwesi had spent years traveling from village to village, learning from the elders and gathering tales of old. But the story of Nguvu intrigued him more than any other. One evening, as Kwesi sat by the fire with a group of travelers, he overheard them speaking about the village. "They say the village reappeared just last night," one of them said, his voice low and full of fear. "No one dares go near it. The spirits still guard it." Kwesi's curiosity was piqued. "What if someone stayed until dawn?" he asked. The travelers fell silent, staring at him as if he had lost his mind. "You don't understand," another traveler replied. "Anyone who stays beyond the moonrise never comes back." But Kwesi was undeterred. His mind raced with possibilities. What had caused the village to disappear? Was it truly the work of spirits? Or was there something more to the legend? Kwesi knew that the only way to uncover the truth was to see the village for himself. The full moon was just a few days away, and the thought of witnessing Nguvu's reappearance ignited his curiosity even more. As the travelers continued their conversation, Kwesi quietly made up his mind. He would find the lost village of the spirits and uncover the mystery that had baffled so many before him. That night, he lay beneath the stars, thinking of the stories he had heard. They were all tales of caution, but none had ever provided answers. It was always fear that had kept others away, but Kwesi was determined to push beyond that. The next morning, Kwesi set out on his journey. He traveled alone, carrying nothing but a small bag of provisions and a carved staff, a gift from an elder in his village. As he made his way across the savanna, the landscape shifted from open plains to rolling hills and dense forests. Kwesi had heard the village was hidden deep in the forest, far from the main paths, and it would take careful navigation to find it. The sun hung low in the sky when Kwesi finally reached the edge of the forest. Tall, ancient trees greeted him, their branches thick and twisted as if they had seen the rise and fall of many generations. He stepped into the shadows of the trees, feeling a sudden chill in the air. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. Kwesi followed a narrow path through the forest, his steps soft on the moss-covered ground. As he walked, he noticed strange carvings etched into the trees, symbols he didn't recognize, but that seemed old and filled with meaning. They were like silent warnings from the past, urging him to turn back. But Kwesi pressed on. As the hours passed, the trees grew denser, their branches weaving together to form a thick canopy that blocked out the sky.
Kwesi felt a sense of unease growing in his chest, but he ignored it. He had come too far to turn back now. Just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the forest in golden light, Kwesi saw it, the Lost Village of Nguvu. There it was, exactly as the stories had said. The village stood before him, nestled between the trees, huts made of mud and thatch, each one perfectly intact. Smoke curled lazily from the chimneys, and the scent of freshly cooked food filled the air. It was as if the village had never vanished, as if it had always been there. Kwesi stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest. Couldn't believe his eyes. It was real. As he entered the village, he noticed something strange. There were no people. The fires burned, the animals wandered freely, but there was no sign of the villagers. The air felt thick, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Kwesi walked through the village, marveling at how untouched everything seemed. The doors of the huts were open, revealing homes that looked as though their owners had just stepped out for a moment. Mats lay on the floor, bowls of food sat untouched on tables, and clothes were neatly folded in corners. No one was there. The more Kwesi explored, the more unsettling the village became. It was as if time had stopped in Nguvu. There were no signs of struggle or decay, just the eerie absence of life. The only sound was the crackling of the fires and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. As the sun disappeared completely, the village became even more surreal. Full moon rose high in the sky, casting a pale, silvery light over the huts. Shadows danced along the ground, and the air grew colder. Kwesi could feel the presence of something ancient, something that had been watching him since he arrived. He decided to stay the night. With a deep breath, Kwesi settled near one of the fires, determined to uncover the truth. He was the first to willingly remain in the village after nightfall, and he knew the spirits might not take kindly to his presence. It wasn't long after the moon reached its peak that Kwesi felt the air change. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and the village, once still, began to stir. At first, it was subtle, a shift in the wind, a faint whisper carried on the breeze. Then, as Kwesi looked toward the center of the village, he saw them. Spirits. They appeared slowly, their forms faint at first, like wisps of smoke that gradually solidified. They walked through the village as if they had never left, moving with a sense of purpose. Men, women, and children, all dressed in the clothing of Nguvu's people, went about their nightly routines, seemingly unaware of Kwesi's presence. Kwesi watched in stunned silence as the spirits continued their ghostly activities. Some gathered around fires, laughing and talking, while others tended to their animals or prepared food. It was as though the village had never vanished, as though life had simply continued for these lost souls, bound to this place by forces beyond understanding. He wanted to speak to them, to ask what had happened, but he hesitated. Would they hear him? Would they even acknowledge him? He had heard stories of spirits who were trapped between worlds, unaware of the living, endlessly repeating the same actions night after night. As Kwesi watched, he noticed something peculiar. The spirits seemed to be reenacting the same scenes over and over. The same woman carried the same basket of food. The same children ran across the same patch of grass. It was as if they were trapped in an eternal loop, reliving their last moments before the village disappeared. He realized that they were not aware of his presence at all. They were lost in time, bound to repeat the final night of their lives, unaware that their world had changed. But what had caused that? Determined to find answers, Kwesi made his way to the center of the village, where a large stone stood. It was unlike anything else in the village, smooth and black, with strange symbols carved into its surface. The stone seemed to hum with energy, and Kwesi could feel its pull. As he approached, the air around the stone seemed to ripple, and the spirits grew more agitated. Their once peaceful movements became frantic, and their whispers grew louder, filled with fear and confusion. Despite the growing tension in the air, Kwesi reached out and touched the stone. The moment his hand made contact, a jolt of energy shot through him, and his vision blurred. The village around him seemed to shift, and suddenly, he was no longer standing in the empty village. He was in Nguvu, but it was alive. The villagers bustled around him, laughing and talking, completely unaware of the fate that awaited them. Kwesi stood frozen, watching as the village thrived, the air filled with life and energy. As Kwesi watched, he realized he was seeing the last night of Nguvu. The night, it vanished. Moon was full, just as it was now, casting its light over the village. People were celebrating something. A festival, perhaps. There was music and dancing, and the air was thick with joy. But as the night wore on, a change came over the village. The music stopped, and the laughter faded. The air grew heavy, and a sense of dread filled the village. The villagers looked around, confused, as a shadow fell over the village. Kwesi's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold. He could feel the tension in the air, the growing fear in the villagers. And then, he saw it. A figure appeared at the edge of the village, shrouded in darkness. It moved slowly, its form indistinct, but its presence was overwhelming. The villagers froze, their faces filled with terror. The figure raised its hand, and a low, eerie chant filled the air. Kwesi realized too late what was happening. The figure was casting a curse on the village. In an instant, the village was consumed by darkness. The villagers screamed, their voices echoing through the night as the village began to fade. One by one, people of Nguvu disappeared, their forms dissolving into the air like smoke. The huts, the fires, the animals, everything vanished, leaving nothing behind but the empty village Kwesi had found. Kwesi stumbled back, his mind reeling from what he had witnessed. The village hadn't just disappeared, it had been taken, trapped by a curse that bound it to the full moon. Kwesi's vision faded, and he found himself back in the present, standing before the stone. The spirits continued their eternal loop around him, unaware of the curse that had trapped them. He knew now that the village had not been lost by accident. It had been cursed by a malevolent force that still lingered in the shadows of the forest. And if the curse was to be broken, someone would have to confront that. As Kwesi turned to leave, he heard a faint voice behind him. It was one of the spirits, the young woman who had been tending to the fire. She looked at him with wide, pleading eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Help us," she said, her words filled with sorrow. "We are trapped. Only you can free us." Kwesi's heart ached for the spirits of Nguvu. They were bound to the village, unable to move on, forever reliving their last moments. He couldn't leave them like that. Kwesi nodded to the spirit, his resolve firm. He would find a way to break the curse and free the villagers of Nguvu. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. The force that had cursed the village was still out there, waiting in the shadows. With a final glance at the village, Kwesi turned and began his journey back to the forest, the weight of his newfound responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He didn't know how he would break the curse, but he was determined to try. As Kwesi made his way back through the forest, the full moon still high in the sky, he thought about the figure he had seen. Who were they? Why had they cursed Nguvu? Answers were elusive, but Kwesi was certain of one thing. The curse had been cast out of anger, perhaps even jealousy. The symbols on the trees seemed to pulse with new meaning as he walked, guiding him towards something that felt both familiar and dangerous. Just as Kwesi reached the edge of the forest, a chill ran down his spine. He turned, and there, standing at the edge of the village, was the shadowy figure from his vision. Its form was clearer now, more defined but no less terrifying. It stood silently watching him with eyes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Kwesi gripped his staff tightly. He knew this was the source of the curse, the one responsible for the village's disappearance. And now, it had returned. Kwesi's fear was palpable, but he knew he couldn't back down now. If he was to break the curse, he would have to face the shadow head-on. He took a deep breath, holding the staff in front of him. As he stepped forward, the shadow did not move, simply watched him, as if waiting for something. "What do you want?" Kwesi demanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. "Why did you curse Nguvu?" The shadow tilted its head slightly, and for the first time it spoke. "The village," the shadow said, its voice low and echoing, "was never meant to exist. It was built on sacred ground that belongs to the spirits. People of Nguvu disturbed the balance, and for that, they were punished." Kwesi felt a pang of sympathy for the villagers, but he knew there had to be more to the story. Punished? For what? They didn't know. The shadow's eyes glowed brighter. Ignorance does not absolve them. Balance must be restored. The village must remain lost. Kwesi's grip tightened on his staff. He couldn't let the shadow win, not after seeing the suffering of the spirits. "The villagers didn't deserve this," he said, his voice firm. "They were innocent. They didn't know they had disturbed sacred ground. There must be another way." The shadow remained silent for a moment, as if considering Kwesi's words. Then slowly it began to fade, its form dissolving into the night. "The balance can only be restored by sacrifice," the shadow whispered before disappearing completely. Kwesi stood alone in the dark forest, the weight of the shadow's words pressing down on him. Sacrifice. He knew now that the only way to break the curse and free the spirits of Nguvu was through sacrifice. But whose sacrifice? As he made his way back toward the village, he thought about the lives that had been lost. The villagers had been cursed for disturbing the sacred ground. Kwesi believed there had to be another way. There had to be something he could offer in exchange for their freedom. When Kwesi returned to the village, the spirits were still trapped in their endless loop, unaware of the curse that bound them. He made his way to the center of the village, where the black stone stood, humming with energy. This was the source of the curse, the anchor that kept the spirits tied to this place. Kwesi knelt before the stone, his staff in hand, and closed his eyes. Called out to the spirits, to the ancestors, to anyone who would listen. "I offer myself in exchange for the villagers. Take me and free them." For a moment there was silence. Then the air around Kwesi began to hum with energy. The spirits, once trapped in their loop, stopped their movements and turned toward him. Their eyes, once filled with confusion, now held a glimmer of hope. "We accept your offer," a voice said, though Kwesi could not tell who had spoken. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the village with its echo. Black stone glowed brightly, and Kwesi felt a surge of energy course through him. As the light from the stone grew brighter, the spirits began to fade, but this time they did not vanish in fear or confusion. They smiled, their faces filled with peace and gratitude. One by one, they disappeared into the night, their forms dissolving into the moonlight. Kwesi watched in awe as the village returned to its empty state, but this time it felt different. Curse had been lifted, the spirits were free. Kwesi felt the weight of the sacrifice settle over him. He had offered himself to the spirits, and now his time was up. But as he stood before the black stone, he realized that he had not been taken. Instead, the stone's glow began to fade, its power finally released. The village of Nguvu was no longer lost. Kwesi stood in the silent village, his heart filled with peace. He had done it. He had freed the spirits, and though the shadow still lingered somewhere in the world, he knew that Nguvu would never be cursed again. With the full moon still shining overhead, Kwesi left the village, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Kwesi, though weary, felt a sense of calm as he began his journey back through the dense forest. The air was lighter now. Forest no longer felt foreboding. The presence of the spirits had lifted, and the weight of the curse was gone. The strange carvings on the trees no longer pulsed with dark energy, but were now simply remnants of a story that had ended. As Kwesi walked, he realized that although he had offered himself as a sacrifice, the spirits had chosen to spare him. The ancestors must have seen his heart, knowing he wasn't acting out of selfishness, but out of compassion and love for the lost villagers. As Kwesi reached the edge of the forest, couldn't help but think about what the shadow had said. Balance. It wasn't just about curses or revenge. The spirits, like all things, needed balance. The disturbance of the sacred ground had caused a ripple in the spiritual world, and the villagers had unknowingly paid the price. But now, the spirits freed and the curse lifted, the balance had been restored. Kwesi understood that the spirits weren't malicious. They were guardians, protectors of the land. They had only acted out of necessity. By the time Kwesi emerged from the forest, dawn was breaking, casting the land in a soft, golden light. In the distance, he could see his own village nestled among the hills. Smoke rose gently from the rooftops, and the morning sounds of village life reached his ears. Roosters crowing, children laughing, and the familiar hum of daily tasks. Kwesi had left the village seeking answers, and now he returned with wisdom beyond what he had imagined. He had learned the power of sacrifice, humility, and most importantly, the importance of balance between the living and the spiritual world. Kwesi did not return to his village with fanfare or grand tales. Instead, he walked quietly through the gates, his mind still turning over everything he had witnessed. The villagers greeted him warmly, some asking where he had gone and what he had seen, but because of the harmony they had cultivated with the spirits. And so, Kwesi's journey was not just a personal one. It changed the way his people lived and how they viewed the world. Though Kwesi had freed the spirits of Nguvu, the memory of the shadow still lingered in his mind. He knew that the shadow represented more than just a curse. It was a reminder of what could happen when the balance was disturbed. The shadow had been a force of anger, jealousy, and imbalance. And though it had faded after Kwesi's confrontation, he knew it was still out there, waiting for another opportunity to reassert its influence. In the years that followed, Kwesi remained vigilant. He continued to travel from village to village, sharing the story of Nguvu and reminding people of the importance of balance. Wherever he went, he watched for signs of the shadow's return. But the shadow never came back. Perhaps it had been defeated for good, or perhaps it was waiting for the right moment. Either way, Kwesi was prepared. He had faced the spirits, confronted the curse, and survived. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he could meet them. With each passing year, Kwesi's wisdom grew. He became known not just for his journey to Nguvu, but for his understanding of the world and the spirits that inhabited it. Elders from other villages came to seek his counsel, and he welcomed them with open arms. He never claimed to be a shaman or a healer, but his words held power. He spoke of balance, of respect for the land and the spirits, and of the importance of understanding the past in order to build a better future. As Kwesi grew older, he began to pass on his knowledge to the younger generation. He took on apprentices, teaching them about the spirits, the land, and the delicate balance between the two. He told them the story of Nguvu, but he also taught them about the shadow and the importance of vigilance. The young people of the village listened eagerly, knowing that they were learning from someone who had walked with the spirits and returned. One night, many years after his first journey, Kwesi decided to return to the Lost Village of Nguvu one last time. He was old now, his hair gray and his steps slower, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He wanted to see the village again, to ensure that the spirits were still at peace. He made the journey alone, just as he had all those years ago. The forest welcomed him, its trees whispering softly in the wind. The path was familiar, and before long, Kwesi found himself standing at the edge of the village. To Kwesi's relief, the village was at peace. The huts still stood, but there was no sign of the spirits. The air was light, and the land felt alive with energy. Kwesi walked through the village, his heart full of gratitude. He knelt before the black stone that had once been the source of the curse. It was cold and silent now, its power gone. Kwesi placed his hand on the stone and whispered a prayer to the ancestors, thanking them for their guidance. As Kwesi stood up, he felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw the faint outline of the spirit woman who had spoken to him all those years ago. She smiled at him, her form glowing softly in the moonlight. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with peace. "You saved us." Kwesi nodded, his heart full. "It was my honor," he replied. With that, the spirit faded into the night, and Kwesi knew that the village was finally free. Kwesi made his way back to his village, the moon lighting his path. He felt a sense of completion, knowing that the spirits of Nguvu were at peace and that the balance had been restored. When he returned, The villagers greeted him with open arms, knowing that he had once again walked with the spirits. They celebrated his return, honoring the wisdom he had brought back with him. Kwesi lived the rest of his days in peace, surrounded by his people and the land he loved. He continued to share his wisdom, reminding the villagers of the importance of balance and respect for the spirits. When Kwesi passed, his story became legend. The tale of the lost village of the spirits was told for generations, not as a story of fear, but as a story of hope, sacrifice, and the power of balance. To this day, the story of Kwesi and the Lost Village of Nguvu is told around fires across the land. It is a reminder that the spirits are always watching, that the land is sacred, and that balance must always be maintained. And if you ever find yourself walking through the forest on a full moon, you might just catch a glimpse of Kwesi, standing at the edge of Nguvu, watching over the village he saved, ensuring that the balance remains.